But I wanted to get started right on time because we have a full afternoon. We have actually, Manuel is so important, he has two people who are introducing him, believe it or not. So by 5 o'clock he'll start his talk. It's a great honor for me to introduce Manuel Antonio Iturralde Vinent. Did I get that right?
Thank you.
Okay. I've known Manuel since 1995. When a group of us, Lisa remembers, and Pamela Halleck is here, but maybe a few others, we put together a Congress, a sedimentary geology for the Geological Society, and had 500 people come here and give abstracts. It was held out at the trade winds, and we wanted to make it special, and definitely Florida. And people came from all over the U.S., but we thought, gee, having a Cuban delegation would be really cool and learn something about the geology of Cuba. And so we contacted Manuel. I didn't know him at the time. And he led a delegation of Cuban scientists up here, and they gave a full day presentations in a room out there at the trade winds. And then we had a field trip. It was arranged by Gene, and so a group went down to Cuba, and Manuel took them out to Western Cuba. And following on that, I said, I got to do the same thing, because I was leading a field trip too, but so I couldn't go on that trip in 1995. But very fortunately, I was able to, associated with a course, a regional geology course in the geology of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, have a field trip of USF Marine scientists, graduate students, and Department of Geology graduate students as well. About 25 of us were able to get permission to fly to Cuba, and we met Manuel. And he led us on an 8-day field trip into Western Cuba, which is one of the most spectacular field trips I've ever been on. Believe it or not, it's a short flight, but you go into a completely different geologic terrain and obviously a completely different cultural terrain as well. And one of the wonderful things that every student mentioned was that it wasn't just a normal field trip. Manuel made sure we didn't have the tourist experience. We avoided the tourists as much as we possibly could. And we ate at farmhouses, and we ate in private homes. And we met Cuban people. And yes, we did see the historical sites of Havana and whatnot. But on the other hand, the whole idea was to have a Cuban experience and not have a tourist experience in Cuba. And Cuba was undergoing a significant changeover from having the sugar cane crop lost as a result of the Soviet Union going away. The Soviet Union paid for the Cuban sugar cane crop at great inflated prices, and that underwrote the Cuban economy. That Soviet Union went away, so Cuba said, what are we going to do? And so they went into the tourist industry in a big way and built 5-star hotels for German entrepreneurs and French entrepreneurs and UK and Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders, but not Americans, obviously, because we had a trade embargo with the country. So getting there was a real issue. It was just amazing. And just as a quick story, I'm kind of starting, and then I'm going to go back a little bit, all right? So hang tight, Gene. We'll get to you. So it took about 6 months of my time to arrange this trip. You wouldn't believe the political hassle I had to go through to do it. It was all as a result of our U.S. Department of Treasury. It was probably the Cubans wanted us down there, but the Americans didn't want to send us down there. So that was kind of political. But anyway, we got permission to go, and off we went. And I got a phone call before we went from a famous paleontologist by the name of McPhee. Some of you may know the name, who is one of the chief scientists at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, which is one of the great natural history museums in the world. And McPhee wanted me to return fossils to Cuba that he had identified for Dr. Iturralde. And I said, and he said, yes, they're dinosaur fossils. And I'm thinking, I'm going to take a T-Rex to Cuba? You get them on the airplane. Well, it turned out to be a small box of a few vertebrae. And they're in a book that Manuel has published, and there they are. And it's these fossils almost put me in jail. The reason was that we got off the plane, and the experience is amazing. We flew on a Boeing 777 with a United crew, but it was chartered by ABC Charters. Well, who the heck is ABC Charters? Well, it's a complicated, convoluted sort of thing. So we flew in this gigantic airplane, landed, got off, processed in through there. And the processing was a little intimidating. And they look, through your paperwork and why are you in Cuba, what are you doing here, and all that. And you're isolated in a room. You're not standing in line. You're in an isolated room, so you're by yourself. And the door opens up, and there's a guy with all kinds of medals and badges and guns and whatnot. And I had this box of fossils in brown paper, brown wrapping paper box. And so he looked at all my paperwork and said, it's all fine. Of course, passports can't get stamped. They have a special thing you put in your passport. And he asked me what was in the box. And I said, well, they're fossils that I'm returning to Cuba. And of course, that was the wrong thing to say. But and of course, he asked, well, how did they get out of Cuba? And said, these are treasures of our country. How did you get them out of Cuba? And I said, well, I don't know, but I was asked to return them. And he said, okay. So door slams shut, door opens up, another guy's there with bigger guns and more badges, and more uplights on their shoulders, and that sort of thing. And asked me the same questions, and I basically gave them the same answer. And curiously, they didn't want to open the box. And I thought for sure they'd open up and say, well, I'm not lying, these are real fossils, and we got pictures of them right here. So he went and got his boss. This is the third guy, and this fellow spoke perfect English, and asked me the same questions. And finally, I smartened up and I said, I'm returning them to Dr. Iturralde. And he said, Manuel, why didn't you say so in the first place? He said, go ahead, join your crew on the bus. And so, the point is that Manuel has been through the Jose Marti International Airport south of Havana so many times that the immigration customs people know him. And the point is that he is widely traveled and been all over the world, interacted with geologists in particularly interestingly enough in Eastern Bloc countries, which brings me to the next part of my story. His life story is amazing, absolutely amazing. I'm trying to encourage him to write a book about it, and how he learned geology in the first place as a young man. And he was there during the revolution, and in 1967, he was interested in the earth sciences, but didn't know anything about it, and learned English from a Chinese lady scientist who was a micropaleontologist, so that's how he learned micropaleontology and learned English. And then in 1967, there was some sort of conference. You used a different term for it. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it was a conference, I guess, led by the Soviet Union in Cuba, in Havana, to bring scientists from Eastern Bloc countries, earth scientists from Eastern Bloc countries to Cuba to decide how to map the country and geologically map the country, because they wanted to know what resources were there, what kind of metalliferous ores were there that could be of use, hydrocarbons were there that could be of use. Nobody really knew or understood what kind of geologic resources that Cuba might have, and so they decided how they're going to break up the country, and the Bulgarians were going to map this part, and the Hungarians were going to map this part, and the East Germans were going to map this part, the Russians were going to, Soviets were going to map this part. I forget that country, but Polish. The Polish have another part, right?
Bulgarians,
Polish, Germans, yeah. Russians, okay. And so he had, in order to, and he was there, and part of this conference, and they all were trained in Spanish, but he had to learn Bulgarian and Russian. And so Manuel speaks 4 languages altogether, and Spanish, of course, English, and Bulgarian, and Russian. And he has been invited to the National Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and given talks at their National Academy in Russian, so he can give a scientific presentation in Russian. Today is in English, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. Sort of.
So to me, that's just remarkable. And so so in order to learn what these Eastern Bloc countries had to say, he had to learn those languages, and so was trained in the geosciences in Bulgarian and Russian, and Spanish, because they could speak Spanish to some degree as well. So I think that's simply a remarkable story. He got his degrees at the university there in Havana. He grew up. You were not born in Havana, you said. Okay, I forgot where you were born.
Cienfuegos,
but grew up in Havana. And he lives in Havana. He became the assistant director of their National Museum of Natural History. Okay, and his wife was the director. They're both retired.
Family business.
Manuel is a professor emeritus, director emeritus, assistant director emeritus, I guess, and a member of the Cuban National Academy of Sciences. So he's retired now. He's here in the States visiting his daughter, who lives in Miami, And I said, this is a golden opportunity to bring him up here and talk to us. So he's going to talk about, in a second here, climate change. Is the title up there? No. Yeah, there it is. It's kind of up there. Climate change, the challenge of small islands, the example of Cuba. So that's all I have to say. Okay, you've got 45 minutes.
Well, the only thing he left out is that Manuel is also a musician, plays guitar, and I think he sings. And so I had this wonderful trip down there with my wife. We went as a crew on a sailboat race that went out of the Tampa Bay, where we were circled by protesters with megaphones and everything. Why are you going down there? Anyhow, we went down, on down to the Hemingway Marina, and we got with Manuel, who gave us a grand tour of Havana. Of course, my wife and I used to go there in a high school band, you know, pre-Castro, so this was nostalgic for us. So I guess the highlight of the trip was he took us to a jazz club that's kind of down, it's in the middle of town and down below, and went in there, and it was this wonderful music playing, and a young, I guess he was 16 years old, incredible drummer with this incredible drum set. So I know something about what drum sets cost. I said, Manuel, where did he get that? He said, you don't want to know. Anyhow, the music was great. Pretty soon these women started coming in and dressed in tuxedos. And Manuel said, well, that's so-and-so. She's the director of the Havana Symphony, and that's so-and-so. She's the first violinist. So anyhow, that was our big memory of being with Manuel. It was a wonderful time and very nostalgic for us to go back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, get on with it.
I forgot to mention that he is the president of the Cuban Geological Society, and he is the editor of this journal, and kindly gave us a copy of this journal that we'll put in our library. It's all in Spanish. Anyway, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you to be here. Well, I hope I will fill your expectations. This is a hard moment, you know? Really, people can believe or not in climate change. Unfortunately, there's people who politicize this issue and then get too complicated to communicate and to provide a real framework for working. We, in Cuba, by almost a presidential rule or law or something, I don't know how to explain perfectly, but it was a presidential action. We had to study the consequences of sea level rise and climate change for the country and provide the government with sound information so to take action for prescribing, avoiding problems in the seashore and even in everywhere, because climate change is happening in Cuba at least, I don't know elsewhere, and this is one of the outputs that came into the press by that time. And in general, we have information, data of sea level rise. We have data of warming of the Cuban climate. We have a wild change in the. We have the so-called. You know that climate change every day, every week. There is a trend, but there is the more frequent, and we have, how we call it? Variability, excuse me. Thank you. And we have a strongest variability for some reason. I don't want to claim it's climate change, but something is happening. So you have to be prepared, either you like it or not, because something is happening. And this is what I want to show you. What is going on in terms of changes probably produced by sea level rise and all these events connected with probably with the climate change, or at least global warming. The first view here, you see how the seashore is transformed, and we are losing this, but I'm going to get there to later. But something is happening. This is Cuba. It's an archipelago with the large island and the small one of Island of Youth and many, more than 4,000 small keys. But every day there is a change. I mean, this figure, we have to change completely every day because after storms, you have one key divided in two, then another storm, put them back together and create a new one. So these numbers are just they don't last too much. Then you have this kind of events which I got data that in 1902 and in 1906 of last century, this happened. And that's why the Malecon was built, to try to avoid the water to come in. But in the last 20 years, it has happened very frequently. So something that was once every 2 or 3 years became something so frequent that now I think people is learning to have an equipment at home because you go around and in Havana is partially already flooded by the sea every 2 or 3 years or 4 years. I mean, it's amazing. And you see all these waves. This is close to my house. Only I live in the second terrace. So this is the first terrace, marine terrace. So I live in the second one, so I don't have this kind of problem. And this is Varadero Beach. We went together there for the field trip, and you see how it's losing sand in some places. And this rock is in the airport of Baracoa, one of the first towns built in Cuba, and it's very far away from the shore. And this was a hurricane who threw this rock all the way from the sea to the airport. We call it Acanolitos because it's a hurricane rock. This was a name created by a Cuban geographer, Antonio Núñez Jiménez. And here you see many towns in the south shore of the island and in the north are being destroyed by hurricanes. But they lasted many, many, many years without such a damage. So something is going on. And this was a storm as high as the water reached over there in 1932, which killed more than 3,000 persons. This was another hurricane with a big wave and wave set up on top. So something is going on. So that's why we were requested to bring information, good information, to plan what to do in the future till 2050, 2100. That was 2 stages to bring the conclusion. And every year we have to present a report to the president in order to have an idea of what it had to be done. So this was Cuba 20,000 years ago, according to my point of view. You see, there was a lot of land. This is land. So you can walk into Island of Youth. And there was shallow water in many places where now is land. So there was a different geography. And after that, all this is now platform. So there was a big change. Sea levels start to rise at that time. And now we have this geography. This geography is important theoretically and conceptually. Understand that this is the result of the last 8,000 years of evolution. Let's not go back. I mean, I don't want to go to the Jurassic or Cretaceous or Pangea, which we can do as well, but at least to try to understand what is going on now. We have to think that in the last 8,000 years, processes have been created, these landscapes, at least in the lower part. I mean, in the platform, which was terrestrial 20,000 years ago, and in the seashore, which was different. This is a brand new seashore or line, and so on. So we focus this project on the seashore because it was the duty we receive. Our job is to understand what is going on. And that's why we start investigating the ecosystems and the health of the ecosystems, because if an ecosystem is healthy, means that there is a balance, there is a normal dynamic. If the ecosystem is damaged, means, or probably means, that there is a change, a transition, there is not an equilibrium, so something is going on. So when the equilibrium of something is broke, then the process of recovery or change into a new equilibrium is taking place. And you can measure that in the ecosystems. So for this purpose, we subdivided the coastline of Cuba and the shallow waters in 15 segments according to the geomorphology of the segments. And in this way, we can focus what we want to do in terms of research and providing information to the government in terms of what is going on and how can be solve the problem if it has any solution at all. So in general, you can see that the green color means lowland. I mean, it's what I call a transitional seashore. Every one of you can draw a different seashore over there. I will show you how. Or not how, why? You see, this is low wetlands, mangrove, in all the green areas. And then the yellow one are marine terrace. So it's a rock seashore with different altitude. Here you can have 15 terraces, a lot of them, 2 or 3 under the water. Here you can have 2, here up to 4, and so on. But everywhere is a limestone seashore. And here is a mountain slope which ends in the sea. So it's a very sharp seashore. You have to consider this if you're going to study how will this seashore react in the future to any process. So these are the 3 main sectors or type of shores. It's not a classification. I mean, you will not call this a classification. It's a practical way to figure out what's going to happen in